We schedule these open teleconferences at a time when the work week winds down and when our more reflective discussions do not crowd our production calendars. What we do to write code and get votes in the middle part of the week. Our streaming advocacy work is focused on strengthening the voice of the user interest, the end market stakeholder, or as we like to say, the user owner final fiduciary. In the education facilities industry, the end market stakeholder works to guarantee a safe and sustainable environment. This sets the stage for the opportunities the education industry provides for our nation's college students. The facilities our faculty need to carry out their research, as well as being the setting for healthcare delivery, athletic events, and ultimately a central element in state and local brand identity. We estimate that of the $300 billion the education industry spends on building, construction, operations and maintenance, energy and safety, over half is governed by the business and technical standards accredited by ANSI. We have explained on our Standard Michigan website that apart from what the University of Michigan started 20 years ago, most of the education facilities industry is not very active in the development of business and technical standards. Any regulatory advocacy capability has been directed toward curriculum, state appropriations, and other relationships with government. Frequently detailed in Office of Management and Budget circulars, where our industry does not seem to advocate. We will cover one of the more important circulars for our industry, Circular A-119, next week. But for today, I'd like to first introduce our guests. Our calling guests are Dennis Johnson with the University of Michigan and Michael Toner from LA. We, of course, have Mike Anthony, who will be continuing our discussion. But before I turn the call over to Mike, we would like to remind the facility constituencies in our industry, including the university-affiliated healthcare systems, to participate in the U.S. Census Department surveys. Although we will not have an expert from the Census Bureau on the call today, we have been in communication with that department recently. We will have to schedule expertise from the Census Bureau during the middle part of the week, and perhaps, contingent upon administrative regulations at the Commerce Department, we will be able to post a video blog on the subject of how the education industry number is derived before next month's construction update. On today's teleconference webpage, you will find a link describing how the Census Department develops their estimates. As with all statistical work, much depends upon respondent surveys. So for more on this subject, I will turn the call over to Mike.
Thanks very much, Christine. Let's get going, shall we? We have the number. It came out, I believe, on Monday. And the number we look at, we like to put a little, we call this our marquee number. If there's a point to anything, it's to get this number highlighted. What you're seeing here is the sum of what they're calling total. This is total construction. They seem to break it out between private construction and public construction. First of all, do I have a good sound? Am I sounding well enough to you?
Yes, you're fine.
I'm assuming, okay. We did the sound check. We had to do a couple other takes. So what that represents is month over month, so to say, is that we're seeing an increase of 5.1% of construction. Now, I did talk to the Census Bureau just before this call, and their claim is that they're watching everything over $75,000. Their principal source is the Dodge Data Analytics. It used to be part of McGraw-Hill. And I guess they've broken off and they're doing something a little bit different independently. So they remind me that we're working at $75,000 projects, and I did get an answer, and they're not breaking out what would be called renovations, or O&M as we call it, separately. So that's important to us because when we look at this $83.3 billion number, which is just for education now, by the way. I want you to just follow, if I can get a little bit closer here. I'm going to be looking at education here and education down here. If you look a little bit farther down there, you'll see 67. They are calling that public construction, and which is likely K-12 schools. And private construction, again, they may not think of private construction the same way that we do, as in private university, or, publicly traded organizations that are in the education space. It may well be that it's bonded money, which you'll often find in a lot of larger state construction projects. So that much said, we'll probably get a little more clarity about this, but I bring it up because it could be important in the standard space. Farther out, as I explained, my colleagues there, our colleagues at the Census Bureau, is that very often the break point between operation and maintenance construction, which is basically one for one, it doesn't necessarily require an inspection if you're doing, in-kind type of renovations. For example, if you're doing in-kind replacement of your house windows, there's not a special process. But if you're adding, capital expenditure, what would be considered adding value, then above the 50% mark, very often you're taking out the mechanical, electrical system. That's a kind of a project that's managed differently in the way codes and standards are interpreted. So it gets to be a little bit fuzzy. We've got a lot of numbers to look over here, but I'd like to let you know that I did get some clarity. The break point is $75,000. They used to look at numbers below that, $25,000, and there was an anecdote about how they changed their methodology after Hurricane Katrina. So I'll let them explain that in either a video recording or during one of our weekly teleconferences. So this is the number we've got. It looks similar to what we saw last month, but of course it's 5.1% larger. Now, I also want to let you take a look at a little bit the healthcare. The healthcare number is 31.1 billion, and what do we see here? 9.2 billion here. I'm going to take a guess that this is university affiliated hospitals. Remember that university affiliated hospitals, there's many of them. We believe that they're different in very important ways. There's risk aggregations. Usually the state university hospital is one of the places of last resort. They have there's an expectation that if you're taking it to the professors and clinicians at the state university hospital, you're getting a kind of care which is specialized care, care that you wouldn't expect from a regional hospital, for example. So and also there's a lot of heat load in these, and very often we can use that thermal load to co-generate. So university affiliated hospitals, this may well be a number close to that. Can't be sure though. There are other ways of checking this out, but I'm going to let you know we'll be drilling down on what that actually means. There are some sources, but frankly, after having talked to the Census Bureau, they're doing just about the best they can. So what do we have here next? So that's important because when you look at the new, and I put these numbers together. I just changed this Prezi a little bit. That the annual revenue of IBM is at 94 billion, and Boeing annual revenue is 90 billion. So we're basically laying out in terms of new construction or alterations above the 50% mark, the equivalent of the entire annual revenue of IBM or Boeing. Okay, so again, I like to frame our numbers. You'll see a special frame here where we frame our numbers, and you'll see where we come up with a 300 billion. Because the subject gets to be rather dry, we had a clicker question when we present this at conferences, for example. So I'm recycling that clicker question, and actually this number here I have since renovated. I've since updated that. I probably should change this. I think I have 2014 numbers. So we put some numbers out here just for folks that like to do such things, and there may be some prizes there. So we would say, what's the U.S. gross domestic product here? A lot of people don't know what that is. Total value, dollar value of goods and services that are produced by the United States. Here's our answers. You'll see that the answer is B. I believe that's last year's number, 17.4 billion. It's interesting that the European Union is 27 countries. I'll just say 25 plus or minus 2. How about that? Depending on who's in the European Union. I think it's fairly stable. Obviously, there's a lot of news that it may not be stable. But regardless, in the international standard system, which I believe is growing and will continue to grow and find its way onto our balance sheets, they have 27 votes compared to, say, the United States, 27-1. Now, of course, there's a practical reality of the United States having a large market. So it's not fair to say that Europeans outnumber us. We still have a larger market, and that does have some gravitational pull for all of those nations. However, as we've covered elsewhere in our globalization standards, that the center of gravity of economic activity is moving east, and that's where large capital allocators want to chase growth, so to say. Now, China's growth is 10.3 billion. And note that despite the growth of about 8%, it's still half our size. Well, actually, when I did this, it's not quite half the size. I have to tell you that if you've seen some of the changes in the equity markets and the fear that China's growth won't be, 8 to 10%, there's some concern there. They are growing, of course, but there can be some economic dislocation if that growth rate gets below the expectation, so to say. So D is the growth rate of Mexico. You'll see that $1.2 trillion come up a little farther downstream on these slides. And so what you'll see here is the education industry alone is 1.2 trillion. It's about the size of the entire Mexican economy. You'll see this number show up also, 303 billion. So the education facilities only is about the size of Israel's gross domestic product. And I put this here just so you have some reference about the world's gross domestic product. We're something on the order of 20% of the world's gross domestic product is us. So without dwelling too much on that, some statements about growth again. Large equity managers are capital allocators want to put their money to work, and they seek those growth markets. What we're seeing here over how many years? Since 1945, it looks like we've seen average gross domestic product is 3.26, but the 10-year moving average, just in frankly the lifetime of Dennis and or most of the adult lifetime of Dennis, Christine, and Michael, we've only seen a very average growth. I remember an 8% growth economy when I was growing up, and there are concerns that I have. Of course, everyone has it. We'll have to adapt. Now, of course, we can talk about how it's counted. That's a different teleconference. So again, restating the obvious that here's our growth rate, and these are the higher growth economies where capital wants to. Capital is treated well, and these, of course, one of the draconian or one of the Faustian bargains you make is that very often with these higher growth economies that a lot of inequity occurs. That's one of the characteristics of capitalism. You'll get your growth, but you'll see it seems axiomatic that there's inequality that results from that. On the other hand, if you have too much government regulation, you stifle growth. So farther down, you'll see that I just promote a conversation about it. It may be just the nature of the system that we have to swing between. We have to swing between extremes or moderate extremes to find the right spot. So anyway, this tells the story about growth. Where do we get this data? We get this from a subscription the university has with IBIS World, and they give us I can go at any time, and this is 2015. So I think this was, okay, so this is relatively recent. So I picked through all of these. These are, this is the industrial code that's used. This is the researcher who follow these numbers, and you can see. So what I do usually is I look at revenue and I take out wages, and then whatever's left after the teachers and professors have been paid are all the auxiliary functions, most of the auxiliary functions, facilities, safety facilities, utilities, telecom, all of that. So I go through all of these. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in looking in detail. You're welcome to communicate with me separately about them. I can give you some of them. It is proprietary. It's a great organization, very generous and insightful. This is public schools. You can see public schools are contracting. I think large because the youth, the number of youth in America is contracting. What else do we have here? This is private schools. This is the East Coast the Exeter academies and Groton academies, and many of the private schools down south. They're all everywhere. This is what their revenue is. They seem to be growing a bit also. Community colleges seem to be shrinking. I don't know what that's all about, but there's that number. So I take all these numbers when I'm looking at for-profit universities. They're growing at 4.1%. Here's their revenue. And so when you rack them all up like this, you get something that looks like this. So this is what I did in 2013. Again, I took total money coming in, and I just broke out the labor component only, and you get all costs after labor is $453 billion. I did it again this year. I took some updated numbers, and what do we get? We get 473. So it's roughly a 6% increase in cost between 2013 and 2015. That's roughly 3% a year. Kind of looks like the gross domestic product over 2 years. That 3%, at least the average. That's not the moving average, though, is it? Okay, so you get the story. My point here is to try to, how do we come up with our $300 billion number and why it's important? So you'll see, again, I'm citing my sources here. I think that's the whole point of that one. And the next one I have, you know what, we missed one. I think that what I wanted, did I get to this one yet? I think we're going to get to this one a little bit later, so let's go farther ahead. How much of gross domestic product is spent on education? So I look for corroborating numbers. A good source is the American School and University. They're one of the first names in this space. So back in 2013, they were estimating about $242 billion just for the what they call facilities and business products. Fast forward to 2014, their estimates was at $313.9 billion, and come to 2015, now they're back down to 286. So again, you're starting to see the $300 billion number show up or thereabouts. So we're still in the vicinity of it. So I like to point this out to my colleagues. That I usually start with this one. 300 billion is roughly twice the annual sales of General Electric. When I did this presentation a couple of years ago, these are the numbers, rough numbers. Now, I'm a little concerned about this one here. I don't know if this number here, I might have assumed that the Cooper-Bussmann acquisition was burned into this number, but I just looked at their report, and they're claiming 222 billion, and it sure seems to me when they bought that lighting division and domiciled themselves in Ireland that was supposed to be drive a lot of new sales. So we'll see on that one, but it's important because we spend roughly this amount of money on just electrical. So, I've been talking for a bit. Any questions? Am I still sounding okay? Am I moving too fast, too slow? Christine, Dennis, Mike, anything?
Yeah, Mike, actually, I do have a question. Back on the American School and University, most recent slide there, yeah. That one. So, the first figure there is the 286 billion spent on facilities and business products and services. Now, the 79 billion is on construction and capital expenditures. Why wouldn't we include that number and then say we're at 350?
Yeah, no, it is in that number. I believe the way I understand, I've talked to Joe Agron over at American School and University. Our correspondence goes back the better part of 5-6 years, I think. So this number is actually in there. Okay. So that's what's in there. And you start to see this number. This number starts to look at this month's, looks a little bit like this month's construction rate, right? What do we get?
Okay, got it.
Okay. Okay, how am I doing on time? I have a feeling I'm going to be running over. How are we doing on time?
We're about 25 minutes in.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'll try to buzz through this. Okay, so if you look at our gross domestic product, what is 17 trillion, and then you roll back and you use 7.3%. Where are we? There's always a lament about how little we spend proportionately to other so-called developing countries. So I thought I'd put this out here. for others to see. It's not like we're a power of 10 off. And of course, there's different ways of counting also. So this is the percentage of the federal budget. Remember, the federal budget is roughly, what, 25% of that, about, what is the federal budget? Let's say 16, what's it, 4 trillion? Is that what that is? So you take percentage of all this, that's out, the big argument between the left and the right is what's the reasonable proportion of gross domestic product could devote to social services. And so, not social services, but how much should be centralized in Washington. We like to make the joke, you send $1 to Washington, it comes back 37 cents with strings attached. Certainly that's one of the motivations for wanting to bring up those super circulars next week. We'll talk about A119 principally, but we'll talk about the super circular also, which is very detailed in how we conform to be orthodox about how we count government money. Here I'm just trying to make the point that how education stands up in proportion to the rest of the federal budget, which is roughly 25% of gross domestic product. Again, another corroborating number. So, okay, so here's the slide, which is different. I'm trying to pull together and trying others to open up to critique, frankly, as to how we come up with this number. This is what we did. I took the gross domestic product. I took some of the details from a couple years ago about how much is on education. We still come up with roughly 1.2 trillion. And I come up with 20% of you're going to see the 20% show up in a couple other places. One of the things, and I'm not ready to tell you why this number is here. It's actually when you go to a number of universities, and what you're seeing right here, you're going to have to be patient with me so I can tell you why this 20% comes about. But I did look, just so my colleagues here at the University of Michigan understand, is that I understand that we're about $6 billion budget. Half of that is devoted to university-affiliated healthcare systems. So I'm sensitive to people wanting to challenge me on this, and you may want to do that apart. But when you see how the other numbers shake out, then it doesn't seem so unreasonable. Every university is going to be a little bit different of how they handle it. So as a rule of thumb, I don't think it's 10%. I think it's more on the closer to 20%. So that's what we're using in here because it's easier to, frankly, to divide by 2 or to divide by 5 or to multiply 20% by something. So I like to use the energy number here. I believe that the so which, again, this comes from American School and University. They have a number out there for the number of schools. They have a number for energy cost, how much they have for energy cost. And so when you roll through all of these, you look at the number of students. You start to look at, in K-12, you look at higher education. It's fair to challenge this number here. I don't know if it remains at $244 per square foot for energy cost per student. I would think that since 2011 that number should go down, but I raised the question about we're spending a lot of money on sustainability, energy savings, and is that really translating itself? I would be eager to see what this number is, but we don't have time for that. That's probably it is a separate teleconference. So take all these numbers. You come up with this is the energy savings. Obviously, colleges and universities are $400 are going to be larger. It looks like roughly double the energy intensity used per student than K-12. Remember also that higher ed square footage is largely commercial, and it's used more times of the year than K-12. K-12 doesn't have a very high occupancy rate, really. These numbers actually will show up in codes and standards, but that's getting too much into the fine points. So we come up with about 21.2 billion in energy alone. If you assume, if you counting back in reverse, if you take the energy cost, and again, I'm thinking energy as an indicator of the size of an industry or of component of an industry, then if you make some assumptions about 8%, then we're seeing numbers that look like this. So now this 250 seems to be corroborated with the 250 and the 270 starts to look together similar. So if you take those other numbers we got from American School and University, you're starting to see a number that's on either side of 300, so to say. So, long story short, let's do the other thing here. Here we are, a high number. So IBIS World gives us a high number, but I know that in this 474 billion that I've got equipment, and the equipment is part of a is part of a facility, certainly in hospitals, and certainly in classrooms and laboratories. Equipment's part of that. Security is also part of that. So now this is the upper end number. So you start to work with this number and this number and this number and this number. You're right around here, and you like a nice multiplier. A nice even number. It also, in the construction industry, very often we have a rule of thumb about if you spend $1 on equipment, you spend $2 to $3 on labor. So this number starts to look pretty good to us. So that's where it comes from. I'm open to challenge on that one. I would love others to come, but apparently it's this is the largest conversation on this number that I know of. A lot of specialty consultants are doing studies and benchmark studies for other organizations, but I'm inviting them all, as I did in the webpage, to come here and let's work through some of our numbers. So why is it important? It's important because it means that our industry is about a Fortune 2.5 company, at least in terms of annual revenue. We also have market capitalization in terms of the embedded value of our property and the infrastructure, the location, the market value of the real estate that we occupy. But it's important because 300 billion is non-trivial. We know that the trade associations, for example, that service that 300 billion, there's many of them. I mean, no wonder there's so many architects and engineers that want to get in this space. If you go back to some of our earlier teleconferences and you look at the data we presented earlier in this teleconference, we are the largest non-residential building construction market in the United States. Let me say that again, because we're not road builders and we're not house builders. Road builders and house builders and utility builders, I believe, might be spending more. I said we're the largest non-residential building construction market in the United States. So that's why you can have so many trade associations, because there's a lot of spend. And I would argue that the ecosystem of trade associations follows this, I call it a coral reef. A lot of them are in Washington. But we can imagine what happens when a visionary comes to the retail industry. Let's just pick the hardware, the little mom and pop hardware store. And this is not my intention to deride the mom and pop trade association, because there's a lot of good ones out there. But we understand that those trade associations are in a different business than we are. So this number is important, because if we want to think about consolidation, even what kind of economy do you get when you try to consolidate an industry that's so widely disparate? A couple teleconferences ago, we showed you that on I think we took one of the universities, I think it was University of Wisconsin, we took their organization chart and we clicked off nearly all 25 trade associations for every branch of the University of Wisconsin's organization chart. It's not a lot different than several hundred others. So this $300 billion annual spend has got the attention of suppliers, obviously AEs and others, and we want to make sure that we use that market advantage when we're negotiating with competitor interests in the standards arenas. Any questions? Because I think we can find ourselves, I'd like to hurry us along here. I think I'm well over. What am I looking at time-wise, Christine?
We're about 10 minutes over, maybe.
Yeah, okay.
No, not quite.
Not quite. Okay, so we're going to look at the macro, we'll look at the microeconomic view. One of these days, probably I should just break this one out. So what does this mean to an individual building? I was asked some years ago to see, what does this mean to, if I'm going to build a new building? Let's ignore the fact that you have to have pipes between buildings and wires between buildings, and you got to keep it safe and lit between buildings. Let's ignore all that. What does it just mean to a building? So we pick a $50 million building. I think you can see right here. We picked a $50 million building. And these proportions, by the way, are very common in the industry. I'm the son of an architect, so I know roughly what the trades require. Is a proportion of just a general commercial building. And remember, in higher ed, most of our square footage is classified as commercial. It's not classroom. So what do we have here? Am I able to get here? This is what I want to get to. Oh, let's go back here. So when you take all of our code wins, and this document here is tracks. So by discipline, we're working in different areas. What we try to do here is we have advocacy and process, and this is stuff we actually did now. We talk in terms of avoided cost opportunities. We are not, let's put it this way, things that we have done in the standards that make it possible to have choices where you didn't have choices before. So we're working on a number of these. If they're not with us, we just put them over in here, but we actually do have some. And what I wanted to let you see here is that thanks to my colleague Dave Anderson, who's been very active and very productive in challenging many of the building automation control proposals. And I will be the first to admit that to say that what we call green overreach has turned out to be very good for the code win business, if that's what we're in, because some of these ideas are simply, at least from our point of view, and now if I took the point of view of a manufacturer that wants to sell a lot of stuff, it's not good. But from us that are trying to use our money wisely, it's really good for us that we can avoid some of the additional complexity. And it's not going away, folks. This new Internet of Everything zeitgeist, they want to put a sensor on everything, whether or not it gives us actionable intelligence or not. So this actually means, I mean to say that this one here, we need to let this so-called win digest itself. But this now would go into this column and would actually increase our avoided cost opportunity. I'm not forcing your mechanical engineers to not put building temperature sensors in every building. I'm not forcing them to put to completely fill all the squares in the ceiling tile with a sensing device. I'm not stopping them from doing that, but I'm making that the minimum standard of care is such that we can reduce some of that because we received some collaboration and the vote went our way as to whether or not that particular algorithm or that particular device or that particular good intention from a green standpoint was thought to be a little bit too expensive. So I try to put that, this is just avoided cost, that should be avoided cost, presented to architects and engineers of a new $15 million. There are many campus infrastructure technologies between buildings. So that may be another, at double what we get here. So here is where we try to summarize them. We call this the Hansen chart, named after my colleague Lowell Hansen, who said, how does this accumulate over time for us? So we took these, and you'll see this is actually on our one of our websites. Where, we think we direct it to the leadership of the industry, the C-suite, and individual organizations. We start to add them all up since, let's see, 2002. This is a code win. I'm on the National Electrical, some of you know that. I've been there since 90, actually started right about here. And so we add them all up. We had relaxation of operations, maintenance requirements, some, putting power outlet timers on K-12 schools when 1/3 of the time they're not even in school. And that it turns out the committee did agree on that, and I'll give my colleague David Handwerk some credit for making that a reality for us. That doesn't mean that the folks that want to put timers on everything are going to go away. They'll find a way to put timers on just about everything, in the same way that the building automation control folks want to put controls on everything. So so we add them all up. That's what the Hansen chart is, and so we try to summarize this in an eye shot of what we do. We think we're being conservative here, to our detriment. Also, we have a couple other. These are advocacy priorities, so to say. We'd like to see that eyewash testing interval rationalized. We don't think it should be once a week everywhere. And we're also working on the oversizing of building of commercial building transformers. We cover that elsewhere on our website. Okay, I'm not going to even ask a question. Well, I suppose any question on the micro level stuff? I know we want to get this over. Okay, let's move on. Then what we have here is, I try to say that, especially after I just talked a bit about how we find that green activism often overspecifies controls, or at least sensing elements that don't really add value within our time frame. In the sense, they don't add value because they seem to be additional expense that don't recover themselves and pay themselves back. So if we want to put carbon monoxide sensors everywhere in auditoriums, that was another example. At least our experts believe that that was not productive, and I'm sure that it was a manufacturer of carbon monoxide sensors that proposed it. And these are $5,000 each, folks, so it's non-trivial if you've got several million of them. And the rest of the committee, we got a majority of the committee to agree with us. So, but remember that sometimes we're not always right. Sometimes we overdo things, and sometimes we underdo things. We've missed some things, frankly. Just because we have to do triage, we can't do everything. Or as I like to say, U of M can do. We can do almost anything we want, but we can't do everything. And sometimes we try, in the interest of triage, given our choices, we often have to overshoot and undershoot. But I like to say here in this least squares chart to visually say that we do think that we're driving our errors to zero, or and then I think that's a good day's work. I also try to say here that in the process of getting of driving our errors to zero, in a very high level, what we're dealing with in terms of technology and business standards and how they're developed in the context of government has to do with whether or not we want to put more control centrally at the federal government level, or less control and put that at the state level. So what I've tried to show here about a pendulum going back and forth. I visualize this pendulum is intended to convey, this is a conversation among experts who want to find the right thing and know they can't quite agree. But generally, the process of what I call constructive debate on technical and business standards should always be moving. This should always be moving. We find in one extreme that, and I'll just say, the federal government will tend to want to have enforceable prescriptive requirements. So we've seen some success with that. We've got Lake Erie cleaned up because of the EPA. We're seeing automobiles safer. Of course, we all paid for that. I get that. So a lot of safety achievements were because we had large central control. And had we not had that, then we would have seen, we would probably be in a less safe world. On the other hand, we paid for it in terms of economic growth and efficiency. So on the other side here, we have less central control. So we very often, many codes are actually written in shall language, and that's probably one way of describing this difference. On the other side, and this tends to be a lot of enforcement interests. You write a rule so a revenue stream is present to enforce the rule. Over here, you have performance measures that are arbitrated by the market. So, for example, if we take an extreme where the enforcement class that runs the ICC, there might be fire safety people in there that say we don't want anything that burns in the building. So just imagine Las Vegas being completely fire safe and everything is made out of rock. Nothing there to burn. I doubt that anyone will want to go to Las Vegas. So some of the standards are written so that you achieve a certain performance and let the market decide. If you're going to be out of business, you're going to be out of business if your buildings burn down, if you've got too many combustibles in them. So you're actually seeing performance standards generally are promulgated by the international agencies, largely because they're reading a global market of a mixed bag of countries that are developed, emergent economies, and developed economies. So you're seeing the first, you'll see a lot of performance standards coming out of the ISO and the IEC. So that's the story. People ask me when they look at the Hansen chart and they look at our, the Robin chart is a microeconomic chart, says, well, your work is done, right? And my answer is that actually it isn't. It's that in the American system, the standard system is a proxy for government. It's not fair to say that people have not used, business and government have not worked together. Business and government have always been together. and because business is a constituency. I like to use this cartoon because as soon as we close this teleconference today, there'll be 24 other we'll call it regulatory prospects or standards and codes issues to reckon with. We don't get to them all, obviously, but it's just a game played over and over again, and that's America. So we talked a lot about numbers. I want to close out here to say beyond the numbers, I want to give special credit to my friend and colleague for many years, David Anderson, who was responsible for the bulk of the what we call code wins in the ASHRAE suite. Many hundreds of millions of avoided cost opportunities are present now because of the work of David. There are others, Larry Spiel, and I try to say Larry Spielvogel here also. Larry actually ran the ASHRAE 90.1 committee for about 20 years, so he's very familiar with their process. So we have the pleasure of his insight pretty much every week. If you go on our playlist, you'll see that he's been very generous with his time and expertise in guiding us. He's also very funny and insightful, so I was encouraged when he and I get into it. I think it's kind of fun. Is that fair to say, Christine, that once in a while that Larry and I play off each other well enough?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I have a lot of fun with Larry. I think others should too. If you're concerned about Legionnaires, he would be a guy you want to go to. You can see him on our website, and I think there's email addresses there. Finally, Jack Janbeja, he came up with a metaphor this week, which I thought was very good, or maybe it was late last week, is that much of our industry, organizations as well as the industry, are using the same, they haven't sharpened their saw. Now, I couldn't find a good image of a saw sharpening, but I did find this. It's a pencil sharpener. I don't know if the younger folks know what this is, but before computers, there was these things called pencils, and they had to be sharpened from time to time. If you didn't do it, then you couldn't write. So you put it in there, you turn the crank, and it got to be sharper. Jack's point here, and I thought about this all week, is that a large part of our industry, and it's not just our industry, there's inertia in other industries, are trying to do their work with a dull pencil or a very dull saw. And with our streaming advocacy enterprise, we believe that we've sharpened a saw, where we have a sharp pencil now, and we can approach problems and contribute to our industry's goals. Finally, my boss, Rich Robin, he'll be speaking in Baltimore at the Standards Engineering, the Society of Standards Professionals on August 11th. So I think if you go on our website, I think we've got a link to the specifics about that, so I would encourage him. He will be on the stage with somebody from the Department of Commerce. Who is it? Christine, you've been working with him on that. Who else will be on the stage with him? I thought it was somebody. It was it's an author. It's an author.
The author regarding the metric system, and really a focus on the lack of consensus that occurred with the United States not adopting the metric system, and then there will be another speaker who's kind of looking into the future in regards to standards.
Actually, you are a good person. Can you give us a quick review? You did most of his PowerPoint. What could you tell our audience here that would make them want to go listen to Rich?
Well, regarding Rich, he really is going to be carrying forward the story of Standards Michigan and how the user-owner final fiduciary is not an active enough participant in the standard development process, not only with ANSI, but then, of course, with ISO, because one would lead to the other. So really, he's going to be carrying forth that message, and it sounds like it's a fairly unfamiliar message to this particular audience.
Okay, thanks. So I think without anything else here, I hope everyone has a good weekend. You want to close this one out for us, Christine?
Certainly. We want to thank everybody for joining us, and for those of you who are listening to the recording, we thank you for listening to our recording and hope that you continue to visit